Okay, welcome everybody on this first day of the negotiations of the Substa. It's good to be back in Bonn. We meet each other, we meet people again after long years of COVID, and it's really good to start interacting again. Interaction is actually the theme of this side event. It's about accelerated action in the food, water and climate nexus. And nexus means getting people together around the theme, getting them into action. So we're actually at the right place. And by the way, it's raining in Bonn, which is good for food, good for water, and definitely good for the climate. So a hearty welcome to all of you here who have gathered here in Bonn in this room, and a very warm welcome to people who are listening in as an audience from all over the globe. And today we will be talking about the food-water climate nexus. We will have a panel discussion with very interesting panelists, which I will introduce later. Very knowledgeable panelists indeed. But my first task is to introduce the person who needs no introduction after myself. My name is Marcel van Nijnatten. I'm Dutch, with the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality, and I'm the host of this meeting. But the person who will tell us all about the nexus is the person that needs no introduction, Bruce Campbell, who used to be the head of CCAFs, who has a vast knowledge of actually getting things happening on the ground, getting people from words to action in a lot of countries around the world. So, Bruce, give us the best of your thoughts, please.
Good. Great. So I'm going to talk about accelerating actions in this nexus. And I mean, the thing about the food system is it's super complicated. So these are only a few words that are really important. There's nutrition, there's sustainability, there's many other things. And I think one of the problems is that we get lost in the complexity. And so although I was at the start of the climate smart agriculture concept and approach, I've got very critical about all these different words we use. And agroecology, sustainable intensification, you know, I will take a bet with anybody that there's going to be another word within 5 years' time. So I really think that we have to focus on what farmers need, what society needs, what the environment needs, and what we have to do for climate. And that's very specific to different concepts, to different contexts. In 10 minutes, I can't get so specific, but I am going to focus on Africa, and I'm going to focus on drought, not rain. So if you go to the IPCC report, they have a great table summarizing the observed impacts on agriculture. And they list all the different regions of the world, and I've just snipped out sub-Saharan Africa. And sub-Saharan Africa is the only one that gets negatives for every single thing that they've managed to tabulate. Climate change in sub-Saharan Africa is super serious. And it's not all about drought, which I'm going to focus on, but in another statement, they do talk about 75% of the global harvest area has been impacted, and it's increasing in recent years. Another individual indicates 127 million people in sub-Saharan Africa will be exposed to a decrease in water resources under climate change. So drought is something that has to be tackled, though of course there's many other pieces to the climate agenda as well. Quickly change course. By 2030, there will be 230 million more mouths to feed in urban areas in Africa. So this can be seen as a huge problem and a terrible thing, but in fact, I think for the food system and farmers, if we get it right, it's a massive opportunity. Demand is changing, and there's different kinds of food wanted, and the volumes are needed into urban areas. We have to get local and regional markets working. We don't want this to happen. This is imports. We don't want to have to solve the issue of urban growth and demand for food by getting more imports into Africa. Another issue is, another thing you can worry about is rising youth unemployment. But on the opposite extreme, there's rural digitalization is happening, and the youth are fantastic at it. I'm going to come back to this as it's going to be a key piece of the transformation that has to happen. Digital. I then want to focus, and I'm focusing again on irrigation. Globally, 20% of cropland is irrigated, only 5% in Africa. It's something like 6 to 8 million hectares. In the dryland parts of Africa, it has been estimated that between 40 and 100 million hectares can be sustainably irrigated. And this is taking into account environmental flows. Now, you can criticize the numbers and the way they got to the numbers, but at least you can increase the amount. Another publication says 14 million sustainably and profitably. Now, irrigation is super expensive to implement, and therefore you can only do it in certain places where the markets are working. At least it can be doubled. And then, of course, not to close our eyes to the past massive failures of large-scale and expensive irrigation systems. But there's lots of nice writing about small-scale, farmer-led type irrigation schemes. I then want to go on to a different form of irrigation, and solar irrigation. And why solar? Well, the costs are dramatically declining of solar systems. And we can, in the first instance in Africa, it'll probably be off-grid solutions. So in other words, not connected to the national grids. But ultimately, you would want to connect to the national grids. This is a picture from India where they're doing some amazing stuff with solar irrigation. Connected to the grid, extra income for farmer cooperatives on the ground. And if you can get the pricing right, then you can reduce overpumping, because that's a major problem with solar irrigation. It could be groundwater depletion. So if you get the prices right, you will sell to the national grid rather than overpumping. Another piece of the nexus is the energy part, and it's mitigating energy poverty, which is a massive thing in Africa, plus it's greenhouse gas friendly. So it's dealing with the mitigation piece of climate change. And it's also dealing with the adaptation piece, multiple crops, including in the dry season. And it's likely to be positive in nutrition because it will be more nutrient-dense crops that are grown in irrigation systems if one plays it right. So this is my last slide. We need action. And we need to think transformational. Nothing less than transformational is going to get to us where we need. And the IPCC report, the recent one, is pretty clear about that. It says that on-farm options are not going to get us to SDG 2, and they're not going to, if we go above 1.5 degrees, which we definitely will go, or if we go, especially if we go above 2 degrees, on-farm options are not going to solve the adaptation issue. It's a lot about the enabling environment and getting the enabling environment right. So one of the pieces of the enabling environment is the policy piece, and subsidies in particular. At the moment, input subsidies in Africa are mostly going into fertilizer inputs, for example, and seed, and mostly to grain crops. Is it not feasible to think transformational? Because that's the current subsidy is very business as usual. Transformational and thinking about different production systems. We need creative business models because of the high upfront costs, and if we look to the energy sector, there are some really neat ways of dealing with solar implementation. We have to focus on value chains with good market potential. And of course, this is problematic because people far from markets are not going to be able to get involved. But we have to start with value chains with good market potential close to the urbanizing cities. We have to get markets and extension working. So, irrigation is not going to be a silver bullet without a complete thought about policies and institutions. And this is going to be a big piece of the digital piece. Digital is going to be crucial to making that happen. Essentially, you could create jobs in the digital area, in the service sector for solar systems, as well as, of course, in agriculture itself. But the rural jobs can be created outside agriculture. It's all about policies and institutions, and one of the big pieces would be making sure that different sectors speak to each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bruce. As always, very insightful. And indeed, what you talk about is very much highlighted, and it's probably one of the elephants in the room when you talk about climate-proof aquaculture. It's about land use, and the latest report from IPCC, as well as a very knowledgeable report from Clim-Eat, has pointed out that about 52% of the effort that will go into making agriculture climate-proof will have to deal with land use issues. The benefit of being one of the moderators is that you can actually ask a question. So Bruce, I will ask you a question, which I will actually ask to everybody on the panel. You talk about lost in complexity, transformational change, getting people together. Which unlikely partner would you like to see getting involved in climate-smart agriculture?
For the particular piece that I've talked about, I think it's the energy sector, is that we talk about the energy's linkages, but actually to what degree do we really speak with the energy people involved in solar, for example?
And what's in it for them?
There's a massive interest because of energy poverty, for example. So they've also got focused on expanding rural electrification, for example.
Okay, that's work to do on a nexus issue. Thank you very much, Bruce Campbell. Let's now move to our panel, and we have three members of the panel, Simon O'Connell, Ivo Demmers, and Jane Madgwick. I'll ask each of them to give a 3 to 4 minute pitch, and then we will have room for questions from the audience and indeed from the online audience as well. So Simon, starting with you. You are the CEO of SNV. You've talked a lot about in your working relation with social change. You focus on fragile and volatile environments. So maybe you're quite well situated with your experience to take the baton from Bruce and tell us, what do you think is needed to make this nexus work?
Will do. Thank you very much, Marcel, and what a pleasure to go after you, Bruce. And I would just start by saying I think all of us in this room and no doubt online, we know that, let's avoid the buzzwords. Let's be wary of, too much terminology around things like nexus. And, nexus approach is not overly new. We need greater collaborations. We need to indeed find ways of entwining our different approaches, our different projects, but a nexus approach in and of itself is not hugely new. I'm going to put out there, if I may, sort of four key points that I think are necessary to accelerating actions. The first one is indeed the point about the need for us to step outside of our project boxes. So still, we are seeing too much short-term projectized intervention and not enough long-term framing of partnership which goes beyond the outputs that we're working towards. At SNV, I'm delighted we've got many private sector collaborations, many impactful ones. We're working with Rabobank, for example, with support from the Dutch government on a program called CRAFT in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, which is now enabling over 45 small and medium enterprises to push out climate-smart tools and technologies to close to 300,000 smallholders. It's terrific, but what we need to do as SNV in partnership with others is to step up beyond just the project collaboration towards new ways of working together with private sector partners. I'm happy to come back to that later. Secondly, an obvious point that I'm sure many of us have been saying for many, many years, context matters and locally led solutions are the best ones. And that's where I would encourage us all to be paying attention to global public investment framing, new aid and development paradigms which go beyond those historically linear and more traditional aid approaches towards a greater sharing of global public goods. Then there's the point about digitalization and the need for us to accelerate the enabling of digital tools and technologies to make them more available to smallholder farmers. And of course, we need to do that being mindful of inclusivity and the gender gaps around digitalization in particular. We have another lovely example at SNV of a program called Garble in the Sahel, which is enabling with partnerships with the mobile network operator Orange and the Netherlands Space Agency to provide access to information to pastoralists along transhumance corridors and others, but we need more of those digital types of approaches. And then lastly, and perhaps an obvious point that I would be remiss not to say, we need larger volumes of financing for sure, but we need better types of financing. We need more de-risking, we need more innovative mechanisms that enable us to aggregate smaller tranches of financing to ensure that they get to those not just at the top end, but not just at the bottom end, but that big missing middle piece that is still not getting access to the types of financing that is so desperately needed. I'll stop there, Marcel.
Thank you very much. You talked a lot about, you started with the need to go beyond projects and project financing cycles and project-based and so on. What partner do you need to get to that long-term perspective, to get beyond the project cycle?
I'm going to be cheeky, Marcel, if that's okay. I'm going to say it's not just one partner. It's a different type of delivery vehicle. So it's not SNV on our own. It's not the Dutch government on their own. It's not a private sector partner on their own. It's a collaboration across an array of different actors, across sectors, beyond projects, beyond just a focus on outputs towards larger scale outcomes. So it's a multi-stakeholder collaboration.
Very good answer, but I'm still trying to
Challenge
get a little bit,
further,
pick your
please.
mind a little bit
Please.
further. What kind of stakeholder is the most missing, the most obviously missing one that you really need on board now?
The ultimate recipients of those impacts and outcomes that we're working towards. So it's still, at the end of the day, the smallholder farmer's voice that is not being heard enough. They have to be more central to the partnership process.
Thanks. That's a clear message. I'm also expecting such a clear message from Jane. Jane is the CEO from Wetlands International. She's working in her organization is working in 100 countries on wetlands. And the nice thing is that they're actually working in a nexus. They're working on an ecosystems-based solutions to achieve a safe and secure world with water at its center. And water is one of the key ingredients for climate, for food. So Jane, please give us your thoughts.
Thank you. I want to start by just reminding ourselves that when we're talking about addressing climate change, we're doing that against a backdrop of severe land degradation and ecosystem degradation. So these are all working together, and they are caused by poor land and water management. So if we're going to address climate, we need to address the root causes of land degradation, ecosystem degradation alongside. And we need a transformational change in order to do that, because the sectoral approach is really limiting our capability of creating resilience. And when I mention resilience, I'm thinking about resilience in a whole landscape context. resilient landscapes, which really connect the natural, social, institutional values. We need that to happen in order that we can talk about food and water security and climate resilience. And a crucial part of this picture, as you will expect me to say, is wetlands. And why? Because wetlands are the ecosystems which connect blue and green water, which connect land and water management. And well, I don't need to tell you about this because it's already signalled in the SDGs. It's also picked up in numerous recent reports, like the Global Land Outlook mentions wetlands more than 100 times. Like the recent report on planetary boundaries, which is saying that basically the hydrological cycle is broken. The big reason for that is we've lost or degraded more than 80% of the world's wetlands. So if we are to transform landscapes and create resilient water systems, food systems, then we need to safeguard those wetlands still in good condition and restore them on a very large scale. When we overlook the functioning of wetlands and we try to address water and food, what we have witnessed over the last decades is, well, there's a lot of risks of maladaptation, of actually undermining the resilience in the landscape. And the greatest risk comes to the poorest and most vulnerable, who have the greatest direct dependency on those functioning wetland systems. The Sahel has been mentioned. There is rain-fed agriculture, but mostly there's agriculture and fisheries, which is driven by the seasonal flood pulse. So floods are good. Floods is what's driving the economy. And what we also see is in situations where water is taken away from the river and wetland system for irrigation, for hydropower, in too great a way or at the wrong time, then you see a proportionate decrease in the productivity, in the livelihoods of the most poor and vulnerable. And we've seen what happens then in Mali and around the shores of Lake Chad in those countries, then the rise of human insecurity. So you get a downward spiral. So happily, it's possible to conserve and restore such wetland systems as part of agriculture. In fact, these words are not helpful because many agriculture systems are in fact wetlands. Wetlands are vital to every agricultural production to capture and provide water. So it's one and the same. And what we also see is that it's really possible to enable bottom-up, smallholder-driven, fisher-driven transformation of landscapes, which both increases local livelihoods and sustainable production and reduces the threats to the ecosystem and even restores wetlands on a large scale. So we're not talking about conservation, protection versus development or climate action. Actually, what we're saying and what is increasingly proven is that these go hand in hand, that restoring and managing ecosystems is a pathway to restoring good production systems. And we have many examples from Mali, from Ethiopia, other countries across the Sahel, where this is not only happening on a small scale with the 2 or 3 communities, but actually these communities are finding ways to scale this up. So this is encouraging. What's needed, very shortly, I would say bringing the understanding of what's going on in the landscape, the vulnerabilities in the landscape, and the needs of stakeholders together. Knowledge sharing is critical. Really mapping where are these critical ecosystems and how to bring them in to solve these nexus crises. That is needed globally, but it's needed in these particular hotspots. We need coherent policies at a national level and also in transboundary river basins, of course. And this needs new thinking and new ways of working in governments. so that these policies and plans can come together around real assessments about what's possible scenarios for the future and incentivise that landscape management and restoration can happen lower down. And most of all, as has already been hinted, we need partnerships across the sectors to make this happen. I stop there because I'm getting the look from...
Definitely not. You're getting an
moderator.
interested look because I think you're pushing again the button on landscape, on land use, on getting things together. So before we go to Sharm el-Sheikh and the climate summit, we may or may not meet in Kunming for the biodiversity summit.
Yeah.
What ideally would you want to come out of Kunming for the agricultural, for the nexus we're talking about, for agriculture and food and water and climate, to inform the climate COP? What should be the message from Kunming to Sharm el-Sheikh?
Yeah, great question. I'm actually encouraged by what's likely to go into Kunming because instead of just talking about protected areas for nature, actually what's being proposed is more of a systems thinking, is profiling ecosystems as being fundamental to human well-being as well as to nature. With our and our colleagues' encouragement, it's also going to take a source-to-sea approach. So connecting, really the freshwater and land systems right through to the ocean. So this is well on the way to encouraging governments around the world, individually and collectively, to bring that knowledge together to set targets that will sustain and restore the natural functioning of ecosystems. Not only the symptoms of that, which including biodiversity. So this is encouraging. We are promoting strongly global wetland targets there because they were missing. There was land and water, nothing on wetlands. It's a disaster. So I'm happy to say it's coming in, and we have worked out for each major kind of wetland what's really needed by 2030 and what's possible. So there are real feasible, they're ambitious, but feasible targets to adopt in Kunming, and I think that will give a very strong signal for change.
And the question I ask everybody, what stakeholder, partner, is obviously missing now?
Yeah, well, happily that there are fewer and fewer missing. I mean, we're working with water engineers, finance companies, gas companies, humanitarian organisations, hydropower organisations. I mean, everyone needs to come around the table if we're going to solve this problem. There is no space to step to the side. We need those who don't yet recognise the issues to come to the table.
And who are they?
Yeah, that's it. I don't know, maybe someone in the audience can help me out. Who's missing?
Okay, this will be my first question to the audience. Sure. You'll get another couple of minutes to think about it.
But I agree with Simon. In the end, we are talking about those people who live in the landscape, who use the landscape, being empowered really to drive the transformation. And at any other scale, it's all about enabling and incentivising. The real power should be as local as possible. So those stakeholders are most important.
Thanks, Jane. Last, but certainly not least on our panel is Ivo Demmers, and he is Director of the Corporate Research Program on Food Security and Valuing Water at Wageningen University and Research. He's also lived all over the globe, traveled from local to done local projects and has overseen program with lots of projects in it, so he's really knowledgeable. Ivo, what do you have to tell us?
Thank you, Marcel. Yeah, I'm looking forward to go back to Egypt later this year. I happened to live in Egypt a couple of years, but it was a long time ago. Today, you were talking about clear messages. and let me try to make it as easy as possible. I'm talking about A, B, C, D. So that's easy, just 4 letters. And we came up with the A, B, C, D approach in order to improve resilience, not only to climate, but also to shocks related to COVID, and yet again related to social unrest in Africa, but also in Ukraine, of course. Because what we do in Wageningen University in the research is trying to understand the systems, not only the land and water and ecosystems, but also the social and economic systems. And then we saw that different shocks have different need different approaches to improve resilience. So only talking about climate resilience is not enough. We have to talk at and look at different scales because economic shocks will most likely affect the large international trade in food, which we still have in the world. Climate shocks will most affect the systems where we really are close to extracting food from our nature. And then we have the social shocks, which are relating to regional systems, which we want to have more of. So in those A, B, C, D, and it stands for, because you're wondering, what the hell is A, B, C, D standing for? We have to work on agency of local stakeholders to make their own decisions and make their decisions on on a well-informed basis. Education, already mentioned by Bruce, but also access to resources. So that's the A of agency. Buffering resources, also on finance resources, should be able to build in some buffering, also at the local scale. The C is coming from connectivity. What all those shocks show us, we need to be connected to each other. Not only to have meetings through MS Teams or online as today, but also to have the regional food systems working. That's a connectivity. And the D is diversity. Not only biodiversity, but also diversity in systems, in value chains, and in partners. And then I would like to link to the farmer-led irrigation development, Bruce. I really think that can bring a major step forward because it will also bring about the most entrepreneurial skills of the farmers. And that's what we need, I think. We need more entrepreneurial developments, also in the local at local farmers, but also from a government perspective, farmer-led irrigation is helpful. We saw the examples of the large schemes of irrigation, $12,000 per hectare, where farmer-led irrigation can even go about 150 USD for a hectare. So it's much more efficient to have farmer-led irrigation, not only from a financial perspective, but also from a human and farmer development perspective. And what is needed to happen then? Enabling environment is crucial. Crucial in the sense that to prevent overburdening of our resources before stimulating the irrigation, we really need to know our natural system. But then again, we have to talk about finance, we have to talk about the markets and about the technology. So what pumps are available, what does work in the areas, and are the farmers trained? So there we can have a role to increase the position of farmers, and moreover to improve the informal sector in the food systems. And I can dwell a bit more on the informal sector, but I will do that on the basis of your question, Marcel.
Well, you've just given us a 5-minute lecture on what a food system approach is, I would say. Thank you very much, Ivo. So, in this informal sector, how decisive a factor is that, in your opinion?
I saw in Kenya, Kibera, it as a very, very decisive sector. Fish was produced. It was just not brought to market in the biggest slum of Nairobi, because the local leaders of the slum were not connected to the farmers, which were just 150 kilometers away. And the fish went to waste. And through our ongoing program, we made the connection. And since 2 years ago, August 1st, we're shipping 1,000 kilograms of fish every day, and it's sold in Kibera. And that's a contribution to food security, but also to the nutrition security.
Yeah, thanks. Same question. What partner, what stakeholder is, in your opinion, doing less than they could do, is missing, should become more involved?
Yeah, it is those local leaders, the informal sector, who shape our value change, especially the youth in Africa, the half of the population under 25. So how do we reach them? I don't know, Marcel, but those are the people who I really want to meet and want to inspire.
Thanks. Bruce brought also up youth, and it is a theme that's coming up again and again when you go to international conferences. Not to say anything negative about the persons in the room, but the average age is above 25. So indeed, how are we going to activate and how are we going to get Greta Thunberg and other people, not only the advocacy people, but also the people working on the ground, young people that have knowledge about digitalization, have knowledge about food systems, have knowledge about the social structure of their environment. How are we going to get them working? Maybe that's the good question to the audience. Does anybody have any experience in involving youth in a meaningful way in a project or in an environmental business or in a business project? I'm the moderator. I'm going to put you on the spot. I should have said before. Over there. There's a mic coming up. And please, when you take the mic, please mention your name and your affiliacy.
Yes. My name is Heloise from the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality. I don't really have experience involving youth, but I have been young myself, and I know, and I'm still not quite old, I have to say. But if I think about when I was younger, it really inspired me to hear from teachers, or to get involved in projects in school that are about nature and climate. I think education is often overlooked in this whole climate and biodiversity crisis. Like, how can we involve our education system more in this whole nexus approach?
Thanks, Eloise. 2 good points. Let's think about what we thought when we were young, and let's get the education solved. Simon, I'm coming back to you because I saw you were raising your hand, but we have one more question, and I'll turn to our panelists.
It's not a question, but I'm Benedicte, and I represent. I'm an observer for the NGOs in Norway. And what I've done with a lot of youth is that I organize for them to volunteer at farms in summer. And what they think they're going to do is that they're going to pet a lot of cute sheep and stuff. And that's how you get them to do it. But then when they're there and they're excited about the sheep, you tell them about the whole process, and they get to help with all the practical stuff at the farms. They learn more about the soil and grass and all those things that they might think is boring, but it's really so important for understanding climate and food. So I would recommend doing that because it seems to work.
Thank you. I'm turning to our panel. Simon, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Marcel. Actually, I very recently, last couple of weeks, I've been in Rwanda and Ghana, and I can tell you I was inspired to see a very young hydroponics adopting strawberry farmer in Rwanda. I think it's the first hydroponics set up there in the country, supported by the Dutch government. I was then in Ghana, where we're working on a EU-funded program called Green, which is all about creating green jobs. And I saw young people, not working in isolation, but within, probably still micro enterprise structures, but some of them a little bit bigger than that, working to take coconuts and convert them into charcoal, working with rice producers and converting rice husks into briquettes. And I'm not saying that in any way to blow SNV's trumpet. What I'm saying is I heard overwhelmingly that the challenges remain still the access to finance. And Marcel, in the spirit of openness and good conversation, if I may, I honestly feel that the question around which partner or group is the most important one, that's not the question for now. The question for now is the partnership mechanism, because Ivo, you were talking about agency, yeah, and this, we cannot be going through these COP dialogues year after year about us giving agency to others. We cannot continue to default to the modality of we here, whether we call ourselves in the global north or not, and personally I see the world as much, much more complex than a global north, global south paradigm, but in that hyper-connected, extremely complex world, we can't be looking at us giving agency to others. We have to be convening the right partnership structures towards those outcomes, and when we frame the outcomes, be it employment or entrepreneurship for young people, then we need to figure out how we get the right types of financing in to enable those outcomes to be achieved collectively within a global public good framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Everybody wants to react. Good. I'll give the floor to one more of our panelists, and then I'll come back to the audience for questions, because questions are important as well. Jane.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to very strongly support what Simon has said, and Wetlands International has been working for some decades now on this question of how to bring stakeholders together in a landscape to make a change. And we've, together with our partners, really started to see what mechanisms work. And I think convening is the right word. Not empowering, not consulting, of course, and all these things. But convening, really giving the chance for all the players to understand what's happening in their landscape. Why, for example, are they experiencing more frequent floods or droughts? What's causing that? And what can be done about it? What can they do? What do others need to do? And also to build their capacity to influence the plans and the finance that is affecting their locality. So to take action themselves, but to influence others. And just by convening the players, the outcomes are not what any of us would bring, but what they see as the desired outcome of all the possibilities. And then you're halfway, actually, to creating what others might call a bankable or investable proposition for investment, for the transformation. So this convening part is crucially important, and sadly, often missed out of major investment opportunities.
Convening power as an accelerator, or a prerequisite even, as you see.
It's preparing the way. So there is a shortage of good propositions for change, to integrate all these issues, to deal with these issues together in a landscape. There's a shortage of them. And that's because there's a lack of investment in these kind of social processes, which can be backed up, need to be backed up by science, which is the first step to seeing what the scenarios could be. And then when you've got that, you can start to fill in what is the proposition and where's the business opportunities for small businesses, what is the role, what's the future for the smallholders. You can see what the future could look like, and make convincing case for significant investments.
Thank you.
Marcel.
Ivo.
Yeah. In addition to the previous, both Jane and Simon, university is about education, but we can't reach everybody. So since, I think, 10 years, we've been organizing challenges worldwide. And I was really, really surprised by the power of youth in bringing solutions and also bringing the convening power to the table. And it was not about us, it was about students, youngsters, and professionals working together on proposals in a challenge way. So there is a bit of competition, but there's also a bit of financing to make that convening powers happen.
I think great example. Questions from the room? At the back over there.
Hi, my name is Rohit. I work with Iklai Local Governments for Sustainability. First of all, thanks a lot for the presentation and the talks on this topic. I just wanted to ask, touching upon all the points that you all mentioned, how do you see, and this is the question that the moderator is asking as well on stakeholders, how do you see and what role does local governments or sustainable subnational governments play in this whole arena? And I'm asking this from the energy lens, let's say, and anyhow all the topics are interrelated, because cities, areas, regions, I mean, looking at trying to, address the demand, would also have issues with land usage. And I saw solar-based farming, that connecting to the city's energy demand. So all these questions, what is the role and responsibility that you see for subnational governments, local authorities, and so on? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a question. I take a couple of questions and I'll go back to our panel. So I'll take two more questions. Yours and yours.
Thank you very much. I'm from the UNCCD Secretariat. Actually, I'm Chinese. My question is that we're talking a lot of science contributions and findings on understanding the role of nature and the landscape methodologies. But we always also are confused how much of our scientific language can be understandable by the local communities. Sometimes we are totally in two different worlds, with the farmers talking about soil fertilizer, compost fertilizer, and the management of water. But we're talking about a lot of the carbon neutrality and emissions. I think there should be a bridge between the scientists and local communities. Use the common language can be understood by the farmers, and also diversify our communication language, not only the dominant language, even UN language is only 6. But the local farmers in Asia Pacific, they have so many different language. In Africa, in so many different language. Maybe we need to let them first understand. Not only we talk with them, but also we listen to them. And then that is a way we can encourage the much more reasonable nature-based solutions. They have a lot of knowledge. And the second one is for the youth. How can we involve more youth in this process close to nature? The UNCCD Secretariat in the last year, we have a serious youth forum with the theme on land-based business and next generations. So I think the most important is the people in our age. We need to provide more platform, and those people making decisions, we set a setting by regulation and also incentives. Regulation, every business, they have the newcomers, they have the young employers. If we set a regulation, requires each business follow the role to be nature-friendly, their young comers, their young employer will be encouraged to find a solution. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more question.
Thank you. I really appreciate this panel and the interconnected nature that we're looking at things, and really all the comments from the panelists and even the questions that have come up so far. But I'm thinking as we see more interconnected, more compound disturbances, as we see the spread of, for instance, food prices because of the conflict in the Ukraine, is it time to start thinking about mechanisms to develop stabilizing forces of the food system at the level above the sort of production system level? So are there policies, institutional measures that we can be thinking about to help smooth out the shocks that we see in food systems? And of course, that they are intimately interconnected with water systems, energy systems, climate in general. So I'd love, I think there's a big role for local food loops and regional food systems, as Bruce mentioned, but we can't get rid of trade altogether, so do we need to think about action at a different level? So just to provoke some thought there.
Could you just mention your name and affiliate?
Sure, I'm Cristina Rombaitis Del Rio from World Resources Institute and the Food and Land Use Coalition.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the questions. So local communities listening to each other, institutional change, panel, enlighten us. Simon.
Big, very broad questions. Thank you very much. I'll do my best to touch on a couple, and I'm sure others will have way more brilliant things to say than I have. I'll just to the second one first, on the language one, a perspective from mine. It's not just the scientific language, it's the development community language, it's the acronyms, it's the ways of communicating. It still relates to my earlier point. There's still a huge need, some might say, to adopt more human-centered design processes to better, draw out the knowledge, ideas, and aspirations of the communities or geographies where we are aiming to make a difference. So, of course, language matters. On the role of government, are we ever going to get larger scale, lasting, positive change without government forces stepping up and the policy frameworks being put in place, or the enabling environment to be made to work better and more inclusivity? No, of course we aren't. So working with governments is, of course, absolutely critical. The challenge is when you've got extreme poverty clustering in protracted crises, or in fragile states or states of fragility, where you've got that inherent breakdown between the relationship between the state and citizen, then you need to work within different time frames. I can say, not within the context of states of fragility. At SNV, we're working on a program called Brillo in Mozambique, which is providing a range of different forms of financing, mostly to small and medium enterprises, but there's sort of challenge grants, matching grants, etc. within the overall mechanisms. That's now enabling a pushing out of 750,000 solar products to different parts of the country through mobilizing that financing. And then on the back of that, when you've got evidence of what works and your impacts, then you start to have a bit of a platform to influence your policy frameworks, which is, of course, so necessary. And we're doing something somewhat similarly now in Ethiopia with the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, in terms of setting up 9 mini-grids and enabling irrigation to smallholder farmers on the back of that. And of course, in that context, you need not necessarily your centralized government mechanisms, but your different sections of government enabling you to establish those mini-grid structures. And then on the round, the last point was around, of course, we need to adopt more systemic or systems change focus approaches. That was sort of what I was trying to say somewhat badly, around the need to step out of your project cycles, to be less linear in your approaches within the context of a shock such as Ukraine. And we were touching on it briefly just earlier. For sure, there's going to be a need for shorter term, perhaps cash injections into particularly fragile parts of parts of the world, but then you need to focus on not just your global trade systems, but your regional markets, your informal trade, and look at what you can do to strengthen those regional linkages. I'll stop there.
Jane.
Excellent questions. I wanted to pick up on the first one, but on the second one, which was about better language and listening locally, just to say every time I go in the field, I'm humbled by the knowledge that is imparted from people who live and work in the landscape. And I think, bringing that together with the top level science, that's where you get the magic happening. But the local government point is a really critical one, I think. I can say for sure that Wetlands International all over the world works with local mayors. And we do so because it's really a way to connect with the people. And many of those local mayors become champions of nature and wetlands. And they're, in a way, a kind of upscaling mechanism that we use because they speak to other mayors and they go to higher levels in government. So we always will get to know and nurture the mayors. And increasingly cities, of course, are really becoming the driving force for innovation in climate adaptation and in improved water management, food in cities as well. So, yeah, I think local government is really coming into its own, a really crucial player. And on the last point, yeah, I think you're completely right, but it's outside my expertise. And maybe this is one of the players we need around the table. Those big food trading organisations need to talk with organisations like ours and others in the room.
One of the elephants in the room. Ivo, would you like to add something?
Yeah, excellent questions indeed. Makes you think, right? And that's important. On the role of governments, if you want to reach out to informal sector, that is not always going through governments. That's what we saw happening in, for instance, Kenya. We are here today in a very formal setting. Mayors work perfectly. I totally agree. But it doesn't bring you to the informal sector. That's not magic. So we need to really be aware of that if we engage also with local stakeholders, government, to really push them to see what's out there beyond their own limits as well. That's what worked for us in Kenya.
Thank you. I'll now turn for the wrap-up of this side event to my colleague from the Ministry of Development Cooperation and International Trade in the Netherlands, Eva Schreuder. She is a specialist on complex negotiation on humanitarian and justice issues. And then she thought, well, let's take it one step further and make it really complex. So she moved into climate change. Eva, what do you take home?
Let's see if it works. Thank you very much, Marcel, and thank you very much to all the panelists. And I will really not try to summarize. I think the excellent interventions, both from the panelists, but also from the colleagues in the room. And also like to compliment those that were really to the point. I've been to quite some side events, and I think you managed very well in making something complex, understandable also for relative outsiders like myself. Of course, I'm in the climate negotiation sphere, but not so much in your world. So compliments on that. And I think it's clear that we need to do more to integrate the wood, the water, food, and climate. And I think what makes this event good, it's both the expertise of those that think about it, but that you also do work exactly on this in this area. I think that's also the focus of Clim-Eat. It's a think and do tank, and I really like that. Like that way of approaching things, because especially in this area, I think that's the combination that we need. To me, it was also central, the partnerships that was mentioned by all of you, the creative ways of collaboration, and also the point of the convening power that all of your organizations, I think, have, and maybe some of you in the room as well, and that we use that convening power to really try to involve all the stakeholders, also those that were by some identified as missing from the table, so that we make an extra effort to also get them on board. But at the same time, also realizing that I think, Jane, you mentioned it, like the people that live in the landscape and that really drive the transformation, that we keep putting them center stage. And that we really, or at least you in your work, try to really focus on working with them, with the local communities, and put them at the center. And perhaps even also at these types of conferences, trying to see how in preparation, although it may be difficult, to get their voices heard as much as possible. Just some other point that I picked up from my perspective is also this focus on enabling environments. It's crucial. I see that also in other parts of adaptation work, and both at the lowest local level and then take it to the national level as well. So I think it's right that everybody put that also as center. And then I was also encouraged by all the opportunities that you saw, I think starting with Bruce in his intervention, but also by the others on the opportunities that digitalization and technology brings, the cost of solar coming down, the increased collaboration or involvement of the private sector that also may lead to more mobilization of finance for your work. And I also would like to mention the part of education that came from the audience and was illustrated by two speakers, and the participation of youth. I think that's also an opportunity to further focus on it and also use these examples that really work. And perhaps as a final point, I think it was unfortunate that our colleague from Egypt could not be here today to really also underline or elaborate on what Egypt is preparing for their COP27, and especially on the, I think it's called the Food and Agriculture for Sustainable Transformation Initiative. It's the FAST initiative. And it's really encouraging to see that also Egypt is taking this agenda really at heart and really putting it center stage at COP27. I think it deserves that platform to bring things forward, and perhaps some of you or in the audience will meet again at COP to discuss further development and progress, and I hope also then with the Egyptian presidency being present. So thank you very much. It was really, for me, it was a good evening.
Thank you very much, Eva. And before I close this session, I would like to thank the organization Clim-Eat for organizing this event. Follow them. They make things happen. And then I want to thank our panel and speakers. That is Bruce Campbell. And please give him a good round of applause. Simon O'Connell, Ivo Demmers, Jane Madgwick, and Eva Schreuder. In Bonn, it's time for dinner, and think about the things that have been said while you eat your food. Thank you very much.
What I worry about is the fact that we know what we've been doing this stuff for longer than I have.
exist a lot overall. Amongst the machine, I don't see that. Actually, I see even in really fragile places. Meeting a young guy in the suburbs of Miami in about 2010 who was doing in a drip feed irrigation from his phone in 750 pumps. Power, power participation. Hi, one question is small scale. About 1,000 of my team. Actually, I did a video of the professional speaking I have. I went there years ago.
So in India, they're trying something where farmers have got solar, but they can sell the electricity to the national grid in a cooperative. And the price, they made the price just right so that the farmer would rather sell the electricity than to pump the water. For me, that's one model that would work. But the problem is when you just got solar pumps which are not connected to the national grid, then you've got real challenges with too much pumping.
Is not so big. That means that underground water. So to estimate the chargeable water, with the pumping volume is bigger than the chargeable volume. So the seems to be not
But I guess it depends where you are as well, because in many parts in Africa, for example, they've worked out, they've done the modeling for the hydrology, and they see that there's plenty of water, and the recharge is low.
So such kind of estimation already done.
Yes.